Welcome to Trench Diaries. This is Battleship Bismarck, Part 6. Hermann Budig and two of his comrades, wanting to be first at their station in compartment 9 of the lower platform deck, and therefore to avoid the choked companionways, sought a different route. They discovered a little-used companionway aft. Hanging onto the inner edge of the hatch, they took their usual 2 steps down, let go and flew, rather than ran, for their station. All of this with heavy tools stuck in their belts of their work clothes. Out of breath, they reached their goal, the first to do so, and reported it clear. But hadn't Budig brushed against something soft at the bottom of the companionway? What could it have been? The man's division officer, Kapitänleutnant Werner Schock, did not attempt the critique that followed the drill, but when it was over, they were ordered to report to his cabin at once. There, a corpsman was applying cold compresses to a beautiful black eye. "Gentlemen," he began what promised to be an unpleasant interview, "if it weren't that everyone looks so much alike in work clothes, I would have caught you earlier. I know you move fast, but you don't have to ram your tools down my throat. Be more careful next time, and now get out!" They did shout Warschau before they jumped, but that was to alert anyone who might have been there to move out of the way and not to tell him to stay put. During emergency drills, First Officer Oehls had heavy responsibilities. His station at such times was in a secondary command center that had been set up in compartment 14 of the upper platform deck. Since he was primarily responsible for the defense of the ship against fire, gas and flooding, as well as for the maintenance of buoyancy and trim, the damage control center was in the same compartment. There also was the ship's security station, in which were kept plans that showed all the ways in which the pumping, flooding, fire extinguishing and ventilation systems could be used to combat the above-mentioned dangers. This area was the heart, so to speak, of the ship, where vital information was delivered and equally vital decisions were made. In mid-October, Lindemann made an operational readiness inspection. He ordered the most important emergency drills and then went around to each station, watched how the men handled their equipment and asked pertinent questions. What he saw satisfied him. "Sailors of the Battleship Bismarck," he said in closing his critique, "this day has convinced me that you have made good progress. Thanks to your instructors and to your own enthusiasm, Bismarck is well on her way to becoming operational." The crew had completed a kind of crash course. In peacetime, it usually took 2 years to bring a warship from commissioning to combat readiness, but because of urgent missions to come, Bismarck could count on no more than 9 months. My tour of duty as Lindemann's adjutant ended about this time. The change, which I foresaw from the start, was brought about by my assignment to a 3-week gunnery course at the Naval Gunnery School in Kiel in November of 1940. At the end of August 1939, the school's course on fire control for large caliber guns, which I was then taking, was interrupted by the threat of war. Now it was to be revived as the completion of gunnery training. At an all-men aft assembly held for some special reason at the beginning of November, Lindemann remarked that on account of my valuable professional training, I would henceforth serve in gunnery only. My place as adjutant was taken by Leutnant zur See Wolfgang Reiner. Although I left Lindemann most unwillingly, I realized it was a move that had to be made. As operational deployment approached, all that mattered was the combat readiness of the ship, and that required that the utmost advantage be taken of everyone's specialty. The second half of November was spent in more tests of Bismarck and her engines. The only thing new was that gunnery drill was added to the routine. Not only were the brand new guns tested for steadiness, the smooth working of their mechanisms, ballistic performance and accuracy, but the resistance of the ship's components to recoil was also tested. Practice firings served to train the gun layers in the best way of keeping on target. These drills could be carried out satisfactorily at close range with 8.8 or 5 cm sub-caliber guns inserted into the barrels of the heavy and medium guns. Because the shells and powder charges used were relatively light, this kind of firing was economical. At the same time, it gave the gunnery officers practice in fire control. Then came the first day of full caliber firing. Unforgettable was this day, as Bismarck's heavy guns fired their first full salvo. How far, how violently would the recoil cause the ship to heel over? How quickly would she right herself? Below in the engine rooms, where steam pressure was 65 times that of the atmosphere, the seconds passed slowly. A single crack in the main steam line caused by the shock of firing could result in the death of everyone in the engine room. Boom! The ship seemed to be abruptly jarred sideways, a few loose objects came adrift, a few light bulbs shattered, but that was all. Topside and in the control centers it was quite different. Up there, the sideways movement was scarcely noticeable. Of course, the concussion had already been felt throughout the ship. Her steadiness in the water showed the Bismarck to be an ideal gun platform. At the end of her trials, the ship was scheduled to return to Blohm and Voss in Hamburg so that the yard could give her the finishing touches it had not been able to complete by September. On December the 5th, therefore, Bismarck departed Rügen under escort of Speerbrecher 6 and steamed for Kiel. Passage of the canal again took 2 days, and on December the 9th we were back in Hamburg. On December the 17th, Reich Minister Dr. Joseph Goebbels spoke in a shipyard workshop to the employees of Blohm and Voss who had been assembled for a plant rally. His listeners also included some of Hamburg's leading personalities, among them the chief of the Hamburg Naval Station, Vizeadmiral Ernst Wolf. Goebbels began by thanking the workers for their stalwart conduct and disciplined labor in the face of the British night air raids. He called the shipbuilders and the yard workers soldiers of labor in a Germany that was conducting a total war, a people's war in the best sense. The Führer had not wanted this war, had for long years called upon Europe to be sensible and made peace proposals. Nothing had availed, but now, when England had forced the nation into war, Germany would stake everything on ending it victoriously. In this war, in which, as in any conflict, the victor creates legal title by force of arms, the German people had the opportunity to make good the mistakes of 400 years of German history. While other peoples had divided the world among them, Germany had become Europe's battleground. But today, the politically and racially united German Reich was proclaiming its rights. The dictate of Versailles had circumscribed German living space to an intolerable extent after the German leadership had failed at the decisive hour. That sort of failure was impossible today because it was the Führer's unshakable will to win the war for the whole Volk. Germany would finally have its just share of the world's riches and above all be able to solve its social problems in a generous and exemplary manner. For the attainment of this goal, the Führer had personally made himself the guarantee, and in Germany only his word had weight. The employees of the Blohm and Voss yard enthusiastically joined in the Sieg Heil to Hitler, with which the minister closed his address. Hitler's supreme goal was total war. The military expression that since the publication of Ludendorff's Der totale Krieg in 1935 had been embraced by the totalitarian regime as the mark of a heroic new era and had become a sponsored slogan. It was a war in which the entire personal, material and spiritual strength of a people would be used against the entire enemy people, not just its armed forces. After years of preparation, this now to be considered total war was underway. It had exploded with growing force and would predictably become increasingly ruthless, ruled more and more by feelings of hate and revenge. Thus, it must appear ever more inappropriate for bringing about any kind of acceptable settlement. But moderation was not Hitler's concern. To the contrary, as legal title to the conquests he expected in enemy territories, Goebbels had only paraded the same cherished thesis, according to which in total war the role of policy was merely to serve military realities. That the place once infantry reached in the enemy homeland would dictate the content of policy. That was it, the absolute immoderation of Hitler's policy once more displayed by Goebbels to those who saw anyway. Among those who had recognized Hitler's immoderation early was Eric Arthur Blair, later to become famous as George Orwell. In March 1940, he had written The New English Weekly, supposed that Hitler's program could be put into effect. What he envisages 100 years hence is a continuous state of 250 million Germans with plenty of living room, a horrible, brainless empire in which essentially nothing ever happens except the training of young men for war and the endless breeding of fresh cannon fodder. Exaggerated certainly, but scarcely more so than Hitler's sick visions. I had to think of a man for whom my ship Bismarck was named. One of my relatives had worked as chief nurse in the colonial hospitals at Tanga and Dar es Salaam in German East Africa from 1911 to 1913 and subsequently animated me to study our colonial history. I had come to understand with what extreme endless caution, what intense watchfulness, what understanding of the whole European scene, and with what a fine sense of international risks Bismarck had dared to take even the smallest step of colonial expansion. The papers are full of the launch of Bismarck, so named because of the Führer's love of him. Trowbridge wrote in his diary for February 15th of 1939. Let us hope that they follow Bismarck's policy, which was one of friendship for England, or at any rate avoidance of a clash. What a striking contrast between the insatiable conqueror Hitler and the statesman Bismarck, whose name the brown despot had so shamefully misused through his christening of my ship. It seemed to me a confirmation of my thoughts, my conception of Hitler as a conscienceless gambler, when, a day after a Goebbels speech, he spoke to officer aspirants at the Berlin Sports Palace of the necessity of struggle in general, the need to beat or you will be beaten, kill or you will be killed, and characterized the world as a traveling cup that was continually awarded anew to the bravest people. There was at present no world power that possessed so great a core of racially homogeneous people as the German folk, which he had made ready for this war, resolved to do nothing halfway and stake everything on the turn of the card. Should the 85 million Germans in national solidarity succeed in making good their claim to life, Europe's future would belong to them. If not, then this people would fade away, it would sink back, and it would not be worthwhile to live among this people. Living in an environment in which there was no room for a critic of Hitler, I could again react only with impotence, choke back my cold rage at the tyrant, and withdraw still more deeply into myself. This is your war, Herr Hitler, I thought, not the German people's. You've got it all backwards. Only when you and your system have one day disappeared, only then, when hopefully we will again be ruled by a statesman rather than a gambler, only then will it again be worthwhile to live. And with this reflection of his time, we end this episode. It is quite touching, actually, to read Burkard being torn between his enthusiasm for service and for his ship and his recognition of the oppressive system, which he is completely powerless to fight against on the other side. In the next episode, we'll see the final preparations of Bismarck before going out to sea, and I hope to see you again then. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Bye bye. Cheers.